There for a minute.
Hey everyone.
Hey, Cecil, welcome, man.
Hey, Cecil.
Nice to meet you, Renee. Nice to meet you, Sharon. Good to see you, Grady. Hey,
All
Mark.
right.
You're live.
Very good. Good evening. My name is Grady Hedgespeth, and I want to welcome you to this second in a series of one-hour sessions where distinguished Black alumni of the University of Virginia return virtually to share some of what they've learned since graduating. Now, my background would not suggest that I'm on the lawn, that's for sure. But that's the beauty of being virtual, right? You can be almost anywhere, especially if your heart and mind take you there. So today we're all returning back to the grounds. And we want to virtually share some of what these distinguished alumni have learned since graduating, especially what they wish they had known when they were undergraduates. Hence the title of our sessions. What I know now, I wish I knew then. All of us tonight have been in your shoes. We know time pressures, especially so close to exams. So tonight's interview format is intended to pack a lot of good information into this 1 hour investment of your time. Each night, we're going to take on a different profession, with finance being the focus for tonight. That's with the understanding that there may be many pathways to consider when starting a profession, but there may be just as many new pathways open to you once you get there. Tonight is one of several sessions. The Omega Success Express banner is being sponsored by the brothers of the alumni of Omega Psi Phi fraternity who pledged at Lambda Zeta chapter while we were all at the University of Virginia. We have a reputation throughout our fraternity for being efficient and effective, and we intend to bring those attributes to this series. Our one main objective is for you to come away with useful information that will make you more successful in whatever professional paths you take. So let's meet our guests. First, I'd like to introduce Sharon Bowen. Sharon is currently a brand new board member of Akamai Technology Company and is a board member of several other companies in corporate America. She was formerly a partner at Latham & Watkins and served also under President Obama as a commissioner for the Commodity Futures Trading Bureau. Sharon was part of my class of 1978, and she has both a JD and an MBA from Northwestern University. Renee LaRoche Morris is our second guest. She is very, very new to State Street Bank, where she wears multiple hats, primarily as being the chief of staff to the chief operating officer of State Street Bank. And I'm going to let her talk a little bit more about her background and how she got there. In fact, I'm going to let each one do that as well. Finally, we have Cecil White, who, because he has just landed from a trip that he hopefully might share a little bit about in his new role and his responsibilities, graduated from the university and went to Wall Street, worked on Wall Street as a financial analyst in investment banking, but then found himself deciding to venture into the world of being a talent agent for some of the names that probably are not familiar to you, like the Williams sisters and Cam Newton and a number of others that he'll probably share a few of those. It's, as I've said, there's a lot of different ways into finance and a lot of things you can do once you're there. So let me stop here. And Renee, your background is just so rich. I wanted to give you a few minutes to tell us about your time at Virginia, but more importantly, what have you been doing since you left the university? And that path that's gotten you to State Street now.
Thank you, Grady. So I was at the University of Virginia and I was a foreign affairs major. So the first thing you'll know about me is I did not go to Darden. I was not an econ major or a finance major. So for those of you who are out there who are not business majors, but you're thinking about finance, there is a path for you. I am married to a Lambda Zeta bruh, as they would say, and I'm a Kappa Rho Delta. So I'm deep in my heart for Virginia. And thank you for coming tonight. So I've been in financial services since I left Grounds, and my career has spanned retail, consulting, mergers and acquisitions, strategy, operations. I was CFO twice. Um, I was a chief operating officer. And the thing that I've learned as I have, changed firms and changed roles is that there are a ton of opportunities within the finance space. And you can underestimate how many things there are to do, right? There's tech, there's data, there's marketing, there's hardcore, finance, right? The numbers. But just about everything you're interested in, you can find in a financial institution. And, over the years, I've had a number of amazing experiences. I've traveled the world. I've worked with some amazing people. And I've been allowed to reinvent myself and really indulge all my interests. And that's why I'm still in the industry, but I didn't come to it with a really clear plan. So just know that it's okay if you're not sure what you want to do. It's okay if you're just trying to figure it out. I had no intention necessarily of coming to the banking field. And I ended up here just because it was the right job in the right place with the right paycheck. So two things: you don't have to come out of Darden to be in banking, and you don't have to have a concrete plan. And so that's where I tend to differ sometimes from people you'll talk to, because I've approached my career in a slightly less formal and structured way.
That's fantastic, Renee. That's exactly what I was hoping you would fill us in on. That it was an interesting path that you've taken to the positions that you're currently in. I want to make sure I take a moment here. You and the audience are really the important part of tonight, and you're why we're here. This is a resource for you. So if you have a question, if something that one of our panelists says, strikes you as you want to know something more about that, or just really have a question that's been bugging you about your next career goals, you should use our Q&A function that I think is probably at the top of your screen, and send us a question. We'd be glad to pose these to our panelists. So Sharon, do you want to bring us up to date with what happened since you left Virginia? And I know you ended up at Northwestern, but how did you make that decision? And were there anything in between? What's been going on with you?
First, I'm delighted to be here this evening and to join Renee and Cecil, and obviously to have my great friend Grady. We go back many years. As you can see by our graduation date at UVA. And Grady, I think you mentioned I did a JD MBA at Northwestern, partly because I didn't know where I wanted to be. When I grew up, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a business person or a lawyer. So I decided to apply to both business school and law school. And back then, you had to separately apply to both, and you had to get into both. And there were only 4 schools that I applied to that gave me full scholarships. And Northwestern, was one of them. UVA obviously was one of them. University of Chicago was another one of them as well. And had a great time in Chicago, even though it was quite cold. As you may remember, Grady, we overlapped some time in Chicago. Again, not knowing what I wanted to be when I grew up, I spent a summer at Goldman Sachs in New York. I spent a summer at the Chicago Board of Trade in Chicago. I spent a summer at a law firm in Washington, D.C. And then when it came to that crucial 4th year graduate school, again, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So, and I had outstanding offers, including obviously from Goldman Sachs. And it was really attractive to go straight to investment banking and not even to go to law school, because I actually did Goldman before I did my first year of law school. But nonetheless, I enjoyed the practice of law. Came to New York as a Wall Street lawyer with the plan that I would do that for 2 years, and then I would go and become an investment banker. And I had, an outstanding offer at Goldman and Morgan Stanley and Salomon Brothers, a number of investment banks at that time. But a funny thing happened along the way. I enjoyed the practice of law. And so I stuck with it. And it wasn't until 5 years later, when I was a 5th year associate, that I got approached by a number of headhunters about making a switch to business or to go to another firm, that I moved from my initial firm to a firm that was LA based, that was starting their New York office, called Latham & Watkins, and was the most senior corporate associate at the time, worked on some of the biggest M&A transactions at the time, representing some of the most important people in the financial industry at the time, and decided that I really loved the practice and wanted to be a partner at a law firm. And I was fortunate to make partner a couple of years later. And then
you were one of the first Black partners in that firm, correct?
Well,
and the first Black female?
The first Black female. There was one other Black partner, and frankly, when I joined Wall Street, there were very few Black partners at any majority firms in New York. I could name the 12 of them that were there. The good news is that numbers really increased a lot, and a lot of those folks have been great, mentees, mentors, and friends, and still are today. So, we'll talk a little bit about the power of mentors, and about just when I mentioned the power of mentees. So during my time at Latham, when President Obama first got elected, I got a phone call from a former associate. She had been one of my mentees, African-American woman. She left the firm and moved to DC, became a partner at another law firm, and then took a leave to work for President Obama, his campaign. And the call was like, what do you want to be? Do you want to come into the administration? Do you want to be a cabinet member? What do you want to be? And I said, like, I don't want to be anything. I love my practice. So I'm not moving to DC. I'm not leaving New York. And so they called back 4 weeks later and said, we found something for you where you don't have to leave your law firm. You don't have to move to Washington. Would you be willing to be the vice chair of the Securities Investor Protection Corporation? And I said, okay, let me talk to my partners. And they thought it was a great idea. And I immediately had to look up what was SIPC and what it did. And everyone thought it was a great idea. So I said, fine, I don't have to leave New York. This shouldn't be hard. Long story short, I happened to be vice chair and then acting chair of SIPC during the biggest bankruptcies, the Great Recession of 2008. So Madoff, Lehman Brothers, MF Global, I was, the acting chair of that agency at the time. So fast forward, second election of President Obama, I got the phone call saying, okay, we know you didn't want to move to DC, but we really, really, really want you to. Would you really consider being a commissioner of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission? And I knew what the CFTC was because I knew that derivatives contributed to the financial crisis in a really big way. And I thought, I'm not going to say no to this president, this history-making president, to be the first Black commissioner of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And to do so at a time where I regulated that industry, the $700 trillion swaps market that had never been regulated until that time. So fast forward, I had a great time doing that. Thought I was going to retire for real. And instead, I wound up on corporate boards when I left the CFTC, and on the board of the Intercontinental Exchange and two of its subsidiaries, the New York Stock Exchange and a company called Gov't. I'm also on the board of Neuberger Berman, and as you mentioned, I recently joined the Akamai Technologies board, which has been a rich experience. And the final thing I want to mention, because I have to plug, I'm a partner of Seneca Women, named after Seneca Falls, where we're focused on the economic empowerment of women and girls. And we just announced early in March a partnership with MasterCard and Deserve, a fintech partner, to have a credit card that rewards you 3% cash back when you shop at women-owned businesses in our marketplace. And we will be opening up our marketplace with 1.1 million businesses. So for those of you out there, if you know any women-owned businesses, you can nominate them. Go to our website, nominate a business. When the card is out, get a card, shop women-owned, because we know that women are big drivers of the economy.
Thank you, Sharon. That's thanks for bringing us up to date. There were things in there that I didn't know, so it's good to hear. And for all of you out there, Google SIPC. It is extremely important. It's the most important, perhaps, acronym that you've never heard if you have any interest in Wall Street or if you own any stock.
Yeah.
Look it up. So I want to turn now to Cecil. Great to see you, sir. Good to have you, my young brother. Why don't you tell us what you have been doing since you left the grounds?
Well, first and foremost, I am a proud Lambda Zeta bruh, as Renee mentioned how we refer to ourselves. But for a moment, I have to apologize on behalf of my chapter, because to structure this for me going last after what Sharon just laid out in her amazing career was, I mean, come on, who did that, right? I don't know how I followed that up. But no, in all seriousness, I think before I even get into my story, I think it's so important to point out Renee and Sharon's path, because they truly were trailblazers in their own regard. To be Black in the financial services industry is challenging. And I think that's something that we'll all kind of highlight at some point during this discussion. But to have had trailblazers like themselves step into these spaces before I did, certainly laid a certain framework for me coming into the doors of Barclays when I did in 2015. So I graduated from the Commerce School. I was a finance and management concentrator. I had a minor in African American studies. My goal was really to become a sports agent, which is crazy because one might ask why someone who wants to work at with athletes would be doing mergers and acquisitions and IPOs. But truthfully, coming from Hampton, Virginia, I just knew too many friends and folks from my area who played professional sports who were grossly mismanaged off of the field or off of the court. And so I wanted to really ingratiate myself in business and understand the language of business to be able to execute transactions on their behalf in a more sophisticated way. And so, I had a mentor at the time. I think Sharon had mentioned the importance of mentorship. I had a mentor at the time who was chief marketing officer at the National Basketball Association. Her name was Carol Saudai, and she was a UVA alumnus herself. And, when I asked her about the best way to break into sports, she said that she'd spent, 15 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers before coming to the league. And so I thought, hey, instead of trying to push a mail cart, which is the entry level job that you take if you want to be a talent agent, I'll take Carol's path and try to build that transferable skill set. And at the time, investment banking just offered the most rigorous path to really understanding, like I said, the nuances of deal making. So, started off at Barclays in their healthcare group, stayed there for 2 years, ended up being recruited by Endeavor, which is the parent company for William Morris Endeavor, our talent agency, to be in a corporate strategy and business development group. So I went from servicing clients, right, and working with corporations to being in-house. And so doing, acquisitions on behalf of Endeavor, taking a look at our portfolio businesses, understanding how we could supercharge them, whether that meant acquiring other businesses or entering new markets. I was doing the analysis behind all of those deals. And at that time, God rest his soul, this was 2017, Kobe Bryant was a client of ours. And he had just made a pretty big investment in a company called Body Armor, which is crazy because now everyone knows, but at that time it was kind of like a head scratcher of a brand. And he wanted our help to help, extrapolate, the earnings of the business and really dig in as his agents to help him grow this company, this beverage company that he was really passionate about. And so the CEO of our company came into our finance department, said, hey, I know you guys don't know anything about talent representation, but you know about finance. Kobe needs us to do finance. You all need to start servicing this. And, that was the beginning of what is now the way that, 21st century agents have to do our job. We're now kind of truly business partners and not just, transactional folks. And so my job has really been to be more thoughtful when representing clients who are partnering with brands to get them equity and ownership as opposed to just a paycheck. in exchange for, their promotional work and their marketing services. So I think Grady outlined a couple of the clients that I've worked with, but now the jersey in the background is from a guy named Deion Sanders, who I started working with not too long ago, who's now head football coach at Jackson State, working with Kawhi Leonard from the Los Angeles Clippers. Folks like DeAndre Hopkins from the Arizona Cardinals, down to rookies as well, who are just entering the league. So I can't say who we'll have in this NBA draft class just yet. We haven't announced yet, but there's some pretty exciting developments. But I think to round everything out, my story is one of using finance as a tool to do something that I was extremely passionate about. Financial services was very much a stepping stone for me, but it allowed me to tap into an industry that I was extremely passionate about, and has given me a competitive edge in the sense of deal making. So I would say that for those of you who may want to be in fashion, or may want to be in consumer retail, or may want to do something that's completely outside of the box, but also want to have a foundational skill set to do it, finance can certainly be a great place to start, and certainly give you a little bit of cushion and optionality in case that plan doesn't work out. So what I always tell my dad when he hears about the crazy career that I have is, I'm like, no worry, Dad, if Kawhi fires me, I'll just go back into banking. And I say that jokingly, but once you learn those core skills, they never leave. And I'm forever grateful to McIntyre for giving me, the tools, and also to the women on the phone for, stepping into those companies and those firms, showing them that we have value, and ultimately, being able to get that experience at a firm myself.
So Grady, before we move to the next question, I would be really remiss without saying that my husband also is from the Untitled Chapter, your line brother, and my partner of 42 years. So most of my success is due to that partnership. And I think Sheryl Sandberg made the statement that, one of your most important decisions, particularly for a professional woman, is who you marry, like who your partner is. And I can tell you my success has everything to do with the man who's in the room, my husband.
I was number one, he was number two. So he always had my back too, Sharon. He definitely always had my back. Yep. Cecil, I think in the last 5 minutes, you've shown that you've earned your chair here. Okay. And there was a deliberate plan to try and mix up the generations with our panelists here a little bit, because, we wanted somebody who was fairly close to the folks we're trying to reach tonight, and to use this resource. So perhaps hearing your story, I can't wait to see somebody. Please ask us a question, because I got a whole page of questions here, but I'm sure our panelists would much rather hear what you have to ask of them. But one thing that strikes me is, you've all said this, there are a lot of paths into finance. And just taking a quick second on my own, I went to UVA hell bent for leather to be a lawyer and to be the first Black governor of Virginia. I knew that's what I was going to do, okay? And I got a tip of advice from my dad as we were packing up the car. He had a lifelong friendship with Whitney Young, one of the early pioneers in the Urban League. And I grew up in the Jim Crow South. So I knew that access to capital was kind of an important thing. And he said, well, you may want to go take some economics courses, because I didn't really know anything about it. So I said, okay, Dad, and that economics course that I took changed my career, changed my whole outlook on life. I really wanted to go to Harvard as an undergrad. I got in, but my two social work parents couldn't afford it. And Virginia gave me an Echo Scholar, almost full free ride. I don't have any student debt when I'm leaving. So my dad said, you're going to go to grad school. You'll be at Harvard. Applied to 5 Harvard graduate schools, got in all 5, and went to the Kennedy School. Public policy. Well, you don't have to know about all of my career, but I've been a cabinet secretary. I've been a banker. I've run the Boston franchise, one of the largest banks in the country. I put more than $2 or $3 billion into the hands of minority entrepreneurs and business owners over the course of a 40-year career. And I'm now writing a piece of rule that will change the way that small business lending happens probably for the rest of eternity, because it's going to make sure that we know who gets loans and who doesn't, and whether they're a minority or a woman-owned business or the like. That's never existed before. So I've had a pretty damn good run for somebody who expected to be a lawyer and never got to law school. So there are a lot of paths, folks, that you can take. But one of the things I want to ask each of our panelists, was there some class that you either wish you had taken at Virginia or that you did take that, like for me, that economics course was really important? Let's start with you first, Cecil, since you were there most recently.
Yeah, I don't want to be biased towards the Commerce School, and I've given them enough plugs already. But I'll say one class that I would highly recommend, outside of the Commerce School, is absolutely sociology. Understanding the language of human interaction, right? What motivates human beings, the basis by which people go about decision making, how certain groups of people form. I still draw lessons from that. Especially no matter what you do in business, everyone is a salesperson, right? Even if you're in finance, there's a point where you have to sell. And so I think sociology and psychology both allowed me to become a better seller, just understanding the nuances of dealing with people.
So, Sharon, you want to go take that one next?
So definitely, I think when we spoke the other day, economics, and Ken Elzinger was a great professor. And particularly one of the requirements, at least back then, was you had to read the Wall Street Journal. And I think the subscription for students was like $35 for the year. And that's how I discovered this thing called Wall Street. I had no idea what Wall Street was, where it was, what finance was. And it was really through reading the Wall Street Journal that was my introduction to the whole world of finance. And that was a pivotal moment for me, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. And Renee?
I took Elzinger's class too, which tells you his range.
Yes.
He had an amazing range. But I'm going to say I was a foreign affairs major. And so I spent a lot of time learning about the world and learning about the United States and how it interacted with the world, which many times was very disappointing, frankly, and when you get deep into it. But really learning about other cultures, learning about what truly happened, and understanding why the world, A, feels the way it feels about the United States, and B, being able to relate to people from other cultures was really important, and it served me very well in what is now a very global, banking is a very global industry. And those courses and that education has really helped me.
That's good. Let's take a call from one of our participants. Sharon, I'm going to direct it to you. When do you know when it's right to jump from that first job? And is there some pathway or how do you find better opportunities? You can see it in the Q&A if you want to look at more of the what's being asked here. But you reach that point at some point. How do you know?
Often it just finds you, to be honest with you. I wish I could say I had this map, this road map, but I think you've got to be willing to take the leap and take risk, in terms of knowing when it's time to leave or not. I always of the view, you want to leave on a high note. You want to leave before they ask you to leave. So do a good job where you are. But always, every year I thought about, am I still happy doing what I'm doing? Because I always knew that there were other opportunities out there. And I always tell people, we should always do at least an annual assessment of do I still love what I'm doing? Am I happy doing what I'm doing? Or are there other things I could be doing? And so I think if you don't do that, it's easy to become complacent. And I think it's easy to miss opportunities if you're not out there being curious about what else you could be doing. And I think it was just the curiosity was really sort of the driver for me in terms of being curious enough and being presented with an opportunity. But I didn't ask for any of those positions. They really kind of came to me. You know, but I was, you know, curious enough to say, yes, I'll do that. I'll try that.
You want to challenge that one, Renee?
You know, it's interesting. So my first job was at the Chase Manhattan Bank, which is now JP Morgan Chase, but at the time it was just the Chase Manhattan Bank. And they merged with a bank called Chemical Bank, which most of you have never heard of because you weren't born. And after the merger, the culture was just terrible. And I was working for people that I didn't appreciate, who didn't appreciate me, and I was really unhappy. And I like to work, like I'm a worker. And so for me not to want to go to work or to get up in the morning and go, it's a real sign like, okay, this is a problem. And I had to get over this idea that I was quitting, right? Because the word quitting has these like, you can't cut it, so you quit. And I realized like, this just isn't for me. I'm not happy. I'm not enjoying myself. I don't want to go to work. And I've never not wanted to go to work. And so I knew I was going to go get an MBA at some point. So I applied to go back to school. And I had been working for 4 years. So it was time to consider the MBA. But I'm really glad, honestly, that I wasn't happy in that role, because to Sharon's point, you can get complacent and you could get stuck. And if I hadn't gone to Columbia then, I may not have ever gone. So sometimes when things aren't going well and it forces you to lift your head up, don't necessarily think of that as like, okay, this is the worst thing in the world. It means it's time to think about something else. And it taught me valuable lessons, right? I tell people all the time, you can't pay me $1 million to work in hell. Like, I won't do it. Like, I need to do good work with good people. And it's the only way I work now. And much like Sharon, many of my opportunities that came after that came to me, except this last opportunity. I made a move during COVID, all virtually. I'm working for people that I have never met in person. But it was time I needed to lift my head up. I was getting, you know, I needed a fresh start. I needed new people. I needed a new environment. And so you do have to look around, even if you like your job. I liked my old job very much, but it was just time for something new. So sometimes you're going to be unhappy and it's going to be really time for a change. And sometimes you're going to say, you know what, I'm just ready for a new experience, or I'm ready for new challenges. So it's a mix.
Well, you raise an interesting point here. The time we're living in is really, pretty special. And while the folks who are at the university may not appreciate it now, for better or worse, this time that you are experiencing is going to forever define your generation. I'm curious, I'm going to first ask the questions kind of this way. Is there a point in your career at Virginia that you would say you kind of hit a wall or had a disappointment or had something that didn't go according to plan, that you had to find yourself kind of picking yourself up and dusting yourself off and, starting again? Because all of you sound so successful. There couldn't be anything that was, a stumbling block along the way, right? So was there a time back at the U where, life wasn't a crystal stair?
I'll start and then I'll hand it off. I took calculus and I took my first calculus test and I got a 50, a 5-0. And I was like, oh, absolutely not, right? Like, it's just not gonna happen. And we were still within the drop window, so you could still drop the class, right? And I think they tested you before the drop window was closed just to see where you were at. And so I dropped calculus. And I never took it again at UVA. Now, you can't go to business school without calculus. It's impossible because you can't do the finance.
Right,
You can't do it without the calculus. And so I literally, before I went to business school, I enrolled in a calculus class at NYU that I went to at night because I had to have it, right? So at the time at UVA, I wasn't ready for it, and it scared me tremendously. But fast forward, several years later, I did end up taking my calculus. So and it was the only class I ever dropped at UVA. So it definitely was that mark of like, I couldn't hack it, I couldn't cut it. But I filled the gap later. So sometimes it's not the right time. There are opportunities, right, to fill some gaps later if you don't get a chance to take care of them at Virginia.
How about you, Cecil?
Yeah, mine was more oriented towards the job search. So back then I was a pretty ambitious kid, and my goal was to get a really
I'm
good
surprised.
internship. At that time, especially at Virginia, it's a very competitive place, right? And folks are walking around talking about their internships. Folks are interning at Goldman Sachs or Deloitte or this place or that place. And I took a lot of pride in saying I wanted to work at a talent agency, right? Pre-com school. This was like my first or second year. And I applied to every single sports and talent agency, not just in the country, in the world. Creative Artists Agency, CAA, WME, where I am now. The mom and pop agent that represents like European basketball players, I applied to work for them too for free. And I got rejected by all of them. And for me, it was a coming to Jesus moment. And, I ultimately ended up picking up the phone book. At that time, it is a virtual phone book now. It's like the UVA alumni directory. I sent a bunch of cold emails, and I met Carol Saudai at the National Basketball Association. And then everything that I just said in my massively elongated introduction came to fruition, right? And it was because I didn't get a job and I was trying to figure out how I was going to break in. And so I think the persistence for me, and trying to get in through the front door, it being locked, and you trying to find the open window on the side of the house, right? It made all of the difference for me. And I often remind our colleagues of that, my colleagues in HR about that story now, about how they rejected me back in the day. But I look for anyone out there who's on grounds. I think just remembering as you all are applying for internships that that's really a fraction of time in your professional life. I can't even remember what I was doing for an internship my freshman summer, but the lessons learned from that period of my life stay with me now.
Well, that's amazing, Cecil, because you had mentioned Carol in your opening. I had no idea that basically it was a cold call that made her an important mentor in your life. And I want to come back to the mentor issue, but I want to go to an attendant question because I think it's a really good one. And Sharon, I want you to take on this one. The university was a transition from a kid to a focused adult. When did the light switch go off that drove you to the success that you have achieved?
So when I started at UVA, I was the fourth entering class of women in the college. There were no women at UVA. There were no sororities back then. And there were very few people of color. And so you may recall, Grady, we had to march on Cars Hill to get the Office of African American Affairs at UVA. So, I think some of the things that students probably take for granted today, we actually had to march and protest. And that made me become an adult pretty quickly, in terms of feeling that our generation, we didn't have a choice. We had to push through and we had to force the issue. And so I felt like I became an adult much quicker, even though I grew up in, Chesapeake, Virginia, went to all Black elementary school, the whole bit, and saw KKK rallies and cross burnings growing up, we didn't really have the luxury of, taking for granted to take courses like African American studies. We had to fight for those things.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and the moderator from yesterday and I were trading some notes earlier today, and I made the observation, there's so many Black alumni we have sent our children to UVA, and I think one of the major reasons for that, I certainly know with my own daughter, they grew up with some privilege, and in some respects, a lack of understanding about their racial identity that somehow couldn't be provided until they were put in the cudgel of the fault lines of race in our society. And the reality is, Virginia has been at that fault line from its inception and probably will be for at least the next 100 years. And I wouldn't be surprised if now we're going to end up with third and fourth generation Black folks dealing with the legacies of the white supremacy that Virginia helped to be the forefront of before the Civil War, and which we still struggle with in reconciling our past as a university. I, for one, am a really proud alumni, especially when I see the new memorial to enslaved people right at the footstep of the rotunda, because I think Virginia will forever deal with this original sin of America and the implications of it.
Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, but great, and you made a really good point, because with that march, with people with the tiki torches on the lawn, I lived at 26 East Lawn my last year, and I was like, the audacity of these people to march on the lawn with these torches. I mean, I was so pissed. I was like, how could the university allow this to happen? But anyway.
Well, and for those of us who keep track and who are still wedded to the university, I mean, hence we're all here tonight, we know that each generation of students, including the ones who are on this call tonight, have had to face this. And there is no better life training for what you're going to encounter in the world of work, in the world of public engagement, than you're going to get at the grounds of university. So now back to the topic at hand. I'm going to turn to you, Renee, because in our prep meeting, we talked a lot about the importance of mentors, and it's come up tonight. But there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And I think probably all of us have benefited from both, but some undergrads may not know the difference and the subtleties and why it's important to have both. You want to speak to that a bit?
Sure. So I've had mentors and sponsors, and I have mentors now that I've had for many, many years, right? So mentors can stay with you a long time. And mentors advise you, they challenge you. My mentor tells me about myself all the time, which I appreciate. And they really work with you. It's very much a partnership, and they give guidance and advice. You can find a mentor a number of different ways. People tend to be fairly open and willing to mentor. That's my observation. And if you're looking for a mentor and you're trying to get your way in, people love to talk about themselves. So just ask them, what did you do in your career? How did you become so successful? And then you hook them, and then you ask them at the end of the conversation, are you willing to be my mentor? And then they'll say yes. And they're really important, because it's like a sounding board. It's a safe space. They've seen a lot. They know you, and it's really helpful. Sponsors are different. And sponsors tend to be more senior, definitely more senior. And it tends to be someone you've worked with or worked for, who's in a position of power, not necessarily in your own function or department, but they trust you. They understand how strong you are and that you're really talented. And they are willing to be a voice for your success in rooms where you're probably not going to be. And the thing about sponsors, which is different than mentors, is I've had sponsors who I knew were my sponsors. And then I've had sponsors that I had no idea were my sponsors. And I didn't find out till much later that they had advocated for me with decision makers, and that advocacy had helped me secure, very important positions in my career. Now, can you ask someone to sponsor you? You can. But what I will say is usually you already have a very strong relationship with that person. They trust you, you trust them. They're willing, right, to spend some of their corporate capital on you and to bet on you and to advise others to bet on you or to give you an opportunity. And once you have that relationship, you can engage in a conversation with a sponsor to say, or someone you really trust who you know has a seat at the table to say, these are the things I'm interested in. And I would greatly appreciate it if you would be willing to speak on my behalf when you're around the table and things come up that you think I might be suited for. And if you've got that relationship, you can broach the subject. But we were talking earlier, and I think we probably all have instances where we realized that we had a sponsor that we didn't know we had until much, much later. So the reality is the relationships you're building along the way and the impression you make on the people you work with and you work for is vitally important, because you could have made an amazing impression on someone and they might speak on your behalf and you might not ever know. So really think about building relationships in a way that spans years, spans firms, spans roles, because the industry is small and memories are long. And just know that even someone that you may not think is paying attention to you might be paying very close attention to you. You're on mute, Grady.
It's because I have a fat finger and I was trying to make sure there weren't any questions in the queue. We've pretty much answered the question about mentorship with one important difference to the question that was out there. How do you go about finding a Black mentor specifically? And I'm curious, Cecil, you had Carol Sidao, which you told us how you found. But I got to imagine that in the world you're in now, have you found a Black rabbi or somebody there who's you're able to talk about the business you're in now and get the inside skinny?
I have. And one important nuance, I think that's important just before we move on is, before I dig into identifying Black mentors, is your sponsor, the person who ends up being your sponsor, could also be your mentor, right? If it's somebody who exists within your organization. So for me, and that actually dovetails into your question, Grady, my mentor was the only other Black agent at WME. It's pretty easy to find. I didn't know he was African American. One thing that I read a book before I started my first job called The First 90 Days, right? And I recommend everyone read it. But it just talks about what to do when you enter an organization. And for me, finding really smart people when I came to WME was a massive priority when I came from banking. And so I found the agents who had books of business that I wanted to replicate because I was in finance, but I knew I wanted to be an agent one day. And I saw this guy named Carlos Fleming. I thought he might be Hispanic, but regardless, I just saw his book of business and I wanted to talk to him. And we ended up getting dinner. And he shows up and he's an African-American man. And of course, I came there with a different agenda, right? Like I wanted to talk about his book of business, everything else. But of course, the conversation turns into being a Black agent. He became my mentor from that process. And, I was very intentional, not only about getting advice from him, but about adding value to his business. And through that work that I was doing kind of behind the scenes, he was able to sponsor me when I ultimately made that transition to become an agent. But, I think the best way of finding, African Americans in the space, in this day and age in 2021, your best friend is the internet. LinkedIn is the most powerful tool in the world. I think the bigger question, once you found that Black person in your space, is how to approach them My biggest thing on top of being curious, I think Renee made a point around getting folks to talk about themselves. The other thing is come with ideas. I'll tell you, I get 25 inboxes a day on my LinkedIn. Hey, can you tell me about yourself? Can I tell you about it? I'm actually the opposite. I read about me, right? Like, figure it out, right? My stuff's on my LinkedIn. But if you come to me and say, hey, I read this piece about WME. I saw you guys just made this move. I have a couple ideas I would like to share with you. Do you have 5 minutes to chat? That's my attention grabber, right? Or, hey, I noticed that you guys represent this person. This might be interesting. So again, like for a finance person, like if you see that Goldman Sachs was on a massive IPO and you say, hey, I saw that I saw that, Pinterest just went public, you're in the tech group, by chance, did you work on this deal? If not, could you direct me to who did? I just have a few questions. I'm in whatever. I think just having a level of intentionality once you've identified who those African Americans who are power brokers within your industry are will help you cut through the clutter, because the reality of it is, in the age of information, finding Black folks is easy. But what you do once you found them makes all the difference.
Thank you. Sharon, you may have seen in the chat room, we've got somebody who's concerned that they don't have any skills and they're about to go into McIntyre. Is that okay? I don't feel like I have any skill sets right now. How am I going to get a job? And you're on mute.
You got skills. You just don't know you don't have skills. You have skills, okay? You can write, that's a skill set. If you can speak, that's a skill set. One of the most important skills is, showing up on time. That's a skill set. Meeting deadlines, that's a skill set. The kinds of things, it doesn't really matter. Even when we were evaluating our associates, it didn't matter whether they were a corporate lawyer, litigator, or tax person. The attributes for success were always the same. Is that person a team player? Do they communicate well? Do they write well? What are you known for? Don't volunteer for things that you're not going to show up for. Treat anything as if it's your most important job, and be known for something. That's a skill set. A lot of people don't realize that people are watching you, even in the most mundane roles. So when you volunteer for something, be on time, show up, and do a good job. Because people also remember when you don't do those things. And so if you're at UVA, you've got the skill sets that you need to succeed. Trust me, you really do.
All right, well, talking about that executive management, we're going to manage our clock here. So I'm going to give each of you about a minute left to give any wrap-up comments. And included in that, I would like for you to tell us of a place or something at Virginia that you didn't quite appreciate as much when you were there as you do now. And any other thoughts you want to give us to wrap up the evening? Is there some place? For me, it would be the Dells. And I just love what has been done since I graduated. And every year I try to get back there. And I realized I really didn't appreciate this spot for what it was as much as when I was there, except when I played an occasional game of tennis and just chilled there for a little bit afterwards. So we'll start with you, Renee. Give us a wrap up and tell us a place or something at Virginia you miss more now than when you were there.
An interesting question. I don't know that I have an answer.
It's okay too.
We used to get out to Chris Green Lake occasionally. I didn't have a car, so I was always reliant on somebody else. So I think I would spend more time there if I got the chance. Mm-hmm. And because I met my husband there, I have very, very, very fond memories of UVA. And I think I'd get further off campus a little bit more and explore some of the sites around Charlottesville.
And any final words and theme of tonight that you want to pass along?
I think the only other thing that I really thought about, and this dawned on me when I was in business school, is that there were some people who were really, really brilliantly smart. But they didn't have really strong emotional quotient. And so I grew up thinking like, okay, the smartest people are always going to be like the most successful people. And I realized that there's this balance of intellect, but also an ability to really communicate and work with people and deal with people that is very, very, very important to success. And it's sometimes more important than just raw intellect. And when I was younger, I didn't fully understand how important being able to work with people and being able to relate to people is. And it's been very instrumental in my success. So you may not feel like you're the best student, right? Or that you've grasped every concept and that's intimidating you. But if you can really work with people and you're easy to do business with, you will go very, very far.
Great closing thoughts. Cecil, how about you next?
My most fond memories of UVA I didn't appreciate when I was on grounds, but I appreciate now, are the amazing spots to just sit, be still, and study. I live in Manhattan now, so it's very hard to get a quiet moment. So Alderman Library, I used to go out to the gardens, just to the side of the lawn behind the serpentine walls and study. Beautiful places to be outdoors as you're reading, stuff like that. I think when you're in school, the idea of studying sounds awful, but now if I could sit down and read for 4 hours, it'd be great. And, parting words for me would be, don't be afraid to, chart your own path. I think being at Virginia, as I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to fall into the trap of following the lemmings. Smart people go to investment banking, so you have to go to investment banking. Smart people go to Goldman Sachs, so you have to go to Goldman Sachs. I think there's something extremely valuable to starting your career in finance and traditional financial services, but now particularly with the advent of cryptocurrency, with OTT and digital platforms democratizing the way that people do business, the little guy, so to speak, now has a more realistic opportunity of reaching a consumer without an intermediary. So if you have an idea and you think that there's something that you want to do, that you're passionate about, you're willing to work for it, there's nothing wrong with, looking into entrepreneurship, right? Trying a career in a non-traditional path. So I would say follow your heart and it'll never lead you astray. And business is a tool, it's not a lifestyle. All of this stuff is now Googleable. So if you don't get into comm school, you can YouTube how to do a discounted cash flow analysis. And it's just like you were in McIntyre learning it from a professor. So
Okay,
don't doubt on yourself.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And Sharon, you want to take us home?
Yeah, I mean, those are all really great things. And I always tell people to remain curious. I mean, I think curiosity is the one ingredient that led me to sort of different paths. And so don't ever lose that curiosity that that brought you to college in the first place. Realize that a career is like a marathon, and going to school is like a marathon. So don't sprint. Don't try to do the first 26 miles at the breakneck speed. Know when to slow down. Know when to pace yourself. Know when to take the time off. And like any marathon, you may have to pivot and take a different path here and there. You may fall down and learn how to pick yourself up again. And it's okay to fall down. So, but enjoy your time at UVA. My favorite place is all UVA. I just enjoyed the whole place. So more importantly, enjoy your time there.
Thank you, Sharon. I really want to thank all of our panelists tonight. You really shared your wisdom and your heart with us, and that's greatly appreciated. I want to thank Dean Gist and the Office of Student Life, the Office of African American Affairs. We hope that what you've gotten tonight is tangible and beneficial to you, and that you see the success of these Black alums as an inspiration and a reminder that we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and we have an obligation to help those behind us. I'm going to leave you with James Baldwin, who said, "Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. So you do really well to imitate the panelists that you've heard tonight, and Godspeed on those journeys. Thank you. And join us tomorrow night for our last session in this series on medicine. Good night.